Welcome to Novelist Spotlight. This is Mike Consul, your host. In addition to being the host of this podcast and interviewing novelists, I am a novelist myself. I have 3 published novels. My latest is titled Lolita Firestone, a supernatural novel, and it is set in Sedona, Arizona and Cairo, Egypt. My previous novel is titled Family Recipes, a novel about Italian culture, Catholic guilt, and the culinary crime of the century. And my first novel is named Hardwood, a novel about college basketball and other games young men play. And that story deals with issues ranging from depression and racism to sex, religion, and university politics. All 3 novels are listed in the episode notes. I hope you will buy them, I hope you will read them, and I hope you will thoroughly enjoy them. Now, on with our program. In the spotlight is Amanda DuBois. I love that name, DuBois. She is the founder and managing partner of the DuBois Levias Law Group, a woman-owned boutique family law practice in Seattle. She is also a former high-risk labor and delivery nurse at the University of Washington Medical Center, and she did that before beginning her legal career in medical malpractice. A very foreboding phrase there. We'll delve into that a little bit in a little while here. Today, she writes from her own experiences of confronting injustice. She's also, before we get into her writing practice, she's also the original founder of the Civil Survival Project and the creator of the Full Circle Scholarship Program. And of course, she is the author of the Camille Delaney Mystery Series, and that is a series of novels that explores inequities in the legal system or in society and so on. Amanda DuBois, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me. This is so fun.
Oh, it's great to have you. And Seattle is one of my favorite cities. Let's start with, a career as a high-risk labor delivery nurse. How does one qualify to handle high-risk deliveries of babies?
Oh boy, that's a good question. Well, you gotta be a little steely. It's kind of a tough job. I did that when I was in my early 20s. I got out of nursing school and I immediately, actually when I was still in nursing school, I kind of fell in love with the whole labor and delivery process. And then I actually was the co-founder of one of the original birth centers in the state of Washington, which is back in the day, this long time ago. Labor and delivery was, still pretty cold and austere, and we started wanting to have babies to be born in a more hospitable environment. So hospitals weren't into it at that time, and so we started delivering babies in these birth centers outside the hospital. And I did that for a little while, and then I ended up going down to the University of Washington to be a high-risk labor and delivery nurse, which, in order to do that, you just need, some background in labor and delivery and how to deal with sort of crises. And it's like for moms that have either it's premature labor or moms that might have a medical problem like a heart problem or diabetes or various problems. So it's a little bit like intensive care and labor and delivery and baby.
Yeah, I was going to ask, what qualifies as a high risk delivery, and you just explained that. So you are doing that. The high risk delivery would be in a hospital setting, is that right? Or there'd be yeah, because you just can't take the chance on something like that. Now you did that in your 20s, then you decided to go into law. And why did you go into law, and why medical malpractice at that?
Well, this is kind of a crazy story. I was working as labor and delivery nurse, and actually I decided I wanted to go to medical school. So I went back and I took all those crazy hard science classes, biochemistry and physics and histology and organic chemistry, which is the hardest class I've ever taken. And I did pretty good in all those, but along the way I decided I wasn't super into all that high sciences and stuff. So then I couldn't decide what I wanted to do. So then I thought maybe I'll get an MBA, God knows why. And so I went to the local bookstore, the University of Washington bookstore, and to get the MBA study book. And I don't know if you've been to a university bookstore, but all the study books like the LSAT, the MPAT, the MBA, and whatever they all are, they're all in the same department. So I was grabbing the MBA book, which I think is called the GMAT, and right next to that was the LSAT, which is the law school test. And I'm like, oh, I didn't know any lawyers. I didn't ever think about going to law school, but on a whim, I just grabbed that book as well. So I went home and it was a sunny day in June and I was sitting out on my deck and I was working my way through that GMAT book and it was a lot of math and calculus and it was hard. So I grabbed a beer and I started studying the LSAT book and I was kind of flying through it. And my husband came home that day and I said, I think I'm going to go to law school. And he said, well, why would you go to law school? And I said, well, this GMAT book is super hard for me and I'm pretty good at this LSAT book. So maybe I've got more of the aptitude for lawyer. And that literally is how I ended up in law school.
So you go to law school, but went into medical malpractice. Obviously, you had a background in medicine. So how did you end up though in medical malpractice? Was it simply that, look, I had the background in it, and
Yep.
I saw for myself that there was a lot of bad practice going on among doctors and surgeons, and I could help ameliorate the situation, perhaps.
Well, so it's actually a little bit the opposite. I went into medical malpractice originally because I worked at the university hospital and we have really good medical care there. And I'm thinking, I want to go in medical malpractice and defend doctors who are being wrongfully sued because doctors and nurses and hospitals do a good job. And so I got a job when I was in law school. It's called insurance defense because you really don't work for the doctors, you work for their insurance companies. And so I got this job when I was in law school, working at an insurance defense firm, and I was just gobsmacked to see how much bad medicine was going on because all the doctors, big surprise, don't work in these ivory tower wonderful hospitals, but there's some medical providers that are out there that weren't doing such good work. And so I was, kind of surprised to see that. And meanwhile, I had a friend who was a plaintiff's lawyer, which means you sue doctors and nurses. And he said, well, why don't you come work with me? And I thought, well, that would be cool. And so I decided to go work on his side. Well, my husband is an OBGYN and he flipped out when
He
I
was
said,
appalled.
I was like, wait, what? You're going to do what? And I'm like, yeah, I just kind of feel like I'd be better at, being on the other side where I could use my medical and nursing expertise, to help people who have been harmed by doctors in the medical system. So um, we became the pariahs and like I go to these doctor, those cocktail parties and stuff that you have to go to and the whatnot. And I would be there and they're like, oh my God, Philip's wife is starting to sue us. It's like, oh no. So anyway, I did that for about 7 years, and then I ended up finding my way, oddly enough, into family law, which is where I've been for the past, I don't know, a long time, decades.
Now you yeah, not only became a lawyer, but then you founded your own law practice in Seattle. So what made you decide, rather than working for a law firm, an established large law firm perhaps, um, uh, Davis Wright Tremaine comes to mind. I know they got a Seattle practice. I think they're even based there. But what about what made you think I'm just going to start my own law practice? And is it just you? Well, no, it's a law group, so you have some other lawyers with you. What made you decide you wanted to go your own direction?
Well, I was working in this medical malpractice firm, and I was a partner there, and I think there was 4 or 5 lawyers, and they were all men, and then there was me, and this was back like in the early 90s, I think. And I was struggling because that wasn't a time when there was a lot of, first of all, I had no role models. There were no women lawyers that were in a generation ahead of me, at least not that I knew. So I was sort of in the generation of sort of the trailblazers of the women that were really starting to make their mark in the legal system. And I was looking around at how law firms were um, managed and the hierarchy in the law firms, and I didn't like it. End up leaving. I had a sort of mutual parting of the ways with my partners at that time, and then they got mad at me, and we were arguing over money, and we had to go to a mediation to try to sort out because I was leaving there and they owed me money, and you can imagine. And they wrote, and we were in mediation, and when you go to mediation, usually both sides kind of write a mediation letter to explain their position. And what they said about me, this partner that I didn't get along with, called me a dilettante doctor's wife dabbling at the law.
Mm, wow.
And I took offense to that and thought, sort of living well is the best revenge, right? And I thought, you know what? I can do this better than any of you bleeps. And so I decided to start my own firm. I just thought I don't want to be around any of the way that they were the hierarchy and stuff. I didn't like it. And so I did start my own firm, and I was on my own for a little bit, and then I started adding lawyers. But what I realized was that because I came out of the medical model, doctors graduate from medical school, then they go do a residency. They just don't come out of medical school and start being doctors, right? And lawyers, we don't have that same training system. Like you come out of law school and anybody thinks they can go be a lawyer. But I quickly realized how hard it was for me to teach myself family law right from, because I'd never done it before. And I started a family law firm and taught it to myself. And I thought, this is like a crazy way to do it. So I started my law firm is modeled a little bit more on the medical model, where the new lawyers come in and they work directly with me or another senior partner for a good year of really intensive mentoring before they're sort of launched into being able to have their own practice. And I couldn't find that sort of model because it's not super cost effective. You don't make a lot of money the first year on a brand new lawyer. And so anyway, I just wanted to do it my way. I want to do it my way. So I started my own business.
At what stage of your life did you know that you wanted to write?
Well, this is interesting. I wrote my first book, The Complication. I wrote it the first time about, what's that, 20 years ago. I started it because when I was a malpractice lawyer, because I was a nurse before I was a lawyer, when you're in the medical business, when a patient comes into you, no matter who they are, no matter what they do for a living, no matter how old they are, they're all going to get the same attention and care because human life is considered a valuable commodity in the medical world, right? Well, in the legal world, the legal system has this really weird way of valuing people for purposes of compensation. So, for example, if you're an older person and you get injured or killed due to the negligence of another, you're not considered quote unquote worth as much as a younger wage earner. So people's lives and a baby is worth even less because a baby doesn't make any money. And so people are judged in the legal system, their intrinsic value as a person is based upon the amount of money that they could have made if they would have lived. So we don't value people on, like if you're in medicine, you value people on their inherent worthiness as, you're a person and you have people that love you and you love people and you have a life and that has value. That's not the way the legal system does it. And it always bothered me. It's one reason why I left the malpractice business, because it just seemed really wrong that that's how we valued human lives. And so I decided I wanted to write about it. And at first I thought, oh, I'll write an article or I'll write a book about this, like how we value human lives. And I thought, nobody's going to read this because it's stupid and boring. So maybe I'll write a mystery. So these are legal thrillers that I write. I said, maybe I'll write sort of a legal thriller mystery book that is going to be about a protagonist who is dealing with the challenges of an older man who has died because of the negligence of the doctor. So I figured that was an interesting way to raise this issue sort of for people that, like, most people don't think they want to learn about that. But if they read a book about it and it's just the backdrop of the story, then they read the story and that's all the exciting parts about a thriller. But at the end of the day, they may have learned something about our legal system. So that's why I started writing way back when.
So your books the mystery series. Camille Delaney is your character. Tell us about Camille Delaney. How would you describe her and what are you trying to accomplish with her?
Well, this is funny. I think you write what you know. So she's, in a lot of ways similar to me. She's got a husband who's a doctor and a couple of kids, and she's balancing being a mom and being a wife in a functional marriage with happy children, which I thought was unique because usually when you read a mystery, it's like some recovered alcoholic person who's got a lot of inner angst, and she's not that way. But she's struggling with, being a woman in the legal profession and balancing a family and balancing a life and sort of having her internal value system drive what she does, which is what a lot of lawyers that I know, that's really how we operate. We have a strong moral sense of values and we want to, we want to live those values in our professional life. So she's a lot like me and a lot of the other women lawyers who are moms that I know. And what's kind of funny about it is when I first wrote these two books 20 years ago, and then I put them on a shelf. I got a New York agent and all that kind of stuff, and then I didn't ever sell it. And so I put on a shelf until COVID. And then I had a friend who owned a publishing company, and I thought that would be a fun COVID project when I was up in the San Juans all alone and isolated. So I updated them, and that's when they finally got published. But what's been funny to me about it is when I wrote them, I was the age of Camille, and now I'm the age of her mother. And her mother is a character in the book. And the older I get, the more I'm like, oh, I like this mother. Like, she's super interesting. So it's been a long character arc for Camille, and her mother is also a lawyer, and she's sort of a role model to Camille.
So there's the complication. It's a great title. There's Unshackled. And there is I'm sorry, what would you say about that one?
That's the one that's just about to be published. Yep.
About to be published. And then you had Deliver Them from Evil prior to or that was your second one, right? Deliver Them from Evil.
Yeah.
So here you are with your third one about to be published. When does it actually come out?
February 4th.
February 4th of 2025.
Yep.
Okay. So how do you expect the series to be sustained with Camille Delaney? Sometimes what happens, well, two things happen. Either they're a limited series and they move on to something else, maybe even a new character, or sometimes interspersed among, I think John D. McDonald's a good example of that. He wrote a bunch of Travis McGee novels, but then he also did, the Condominium. He did the Key to the Suite, which was not part of the series, just stepped out from there probably because he wanted just to try something different and kind of try his hand at some new characters. Are you anticipating Camille Delaney being career long, or are you thinking in terms of maybe a limited series, or can't you say yet?
Well, so I have a lot of topics I want to write about, because the longer I practice law and get like up in the business of what's going on in sort of the inequities of how the legal system works, the more I have to say. But the Camille Delaney, it's a little bit of an ensemble cast, for lack of a better word. So there are other characters. I've thought a lot about that, actually. Like, I could not spin off, but I could do one book that focuses on she's sort of like her little team of people that work together. And so the better I get to know them, the longer I write about them, the better I get to know them, and the better they sort of reveal their personalities to me. I kind of get interested in, oh, what if Gigi did this, or what if Trish did that? So there's a lot of possibilities because there's Camille, and then she's got a private investigator, and then they've got a really good friend who's involved, and then she's got some people on her staff. So there's a lot of rich characters that could go in different directions. So that's a good question. And yeah, I've thought about it.
Just in terms of, say, book number 4, do you already have an idea for book number 4, and are you already working on it?
Yeah, well, yes, I have. Funny, yeah, I just had a phone call. So Unshackled, the third book, is about the importance of reuniting mothers in prison with their children. And so, because a big part of my life has to do with working with people that have been in prison, and mothers that have been in prison especially. And as I got sort of deeper into that whole story, I got kind of interested in the idea of women who are survivors of domestic violence who end up killing their abusers. And so I'm thinking something along those lines is going to be. So I just had a phone call with a friend of a friend who's a professor at some big university that specializes in the battered women's defense. And so I'm kind of starting to explore that.
So where you have a passion for social justice is what I hear. And where does that passion come from? I mean, I think of a guy like Ralph Nader, and his parents imbued him with that. Was it from a particular source, or is it just in the DNA?
Well, it's kind of, I think I'm an accidental something, because kind of like I got into law school by just picking up a random book at the bookstore. I got into the social justice work because about, I don't know, 15 or 20 years ago or something, I wrote a series of little short books that teach people basic legal rights and responsibilities, kind of like law for dummies. And so I was sort of, it was sort of a community service type project. So I was teaching these little books to like battered women's shelters or different sort of community groups. And through sort of circumstances that just how life has its twists and turns, I ended up teaching this to a group of people that had recently come out of prison. And I am your typical privileged white lady, law firm owner. Like, I know nothing about the criminal justice system. I don't know anything. I don't practice in that area of the law. I don't know anything about anything. But anyway, I ended up with this group of people, and I was teaching them things like how to be a good employee, and what are your rights as an employee, and what are your responsibilities as an employee, and how do you lease an apartment, and what's included in the lease, and all the stuff that we might have learned from our mom and dad, but this group of people had never really learned, and they were listening and they were engaged, and we're having these great conversations. And this one guy raised his hand. He goes, "This is so helpful, and thank you so much for taking your time to do this, but there's only one problem." And I said, "Well, what's that?" And he goes, "We're all felons, and we can't get a job, and we can't get a place to live." And
because they have to claim that on the form.
yeah, and I was dumbfounded. I had no idea. And I said, "What are you talking about?" And then they started teaching me. And that's when my life shifted. These are people that I had, become really fond of, and some of them have become really good friends of mine. And they were telling me, this one, guy he was kind of a scary looking guy, maybe to the outside world. And he started to cry. And he said, the scariest night, he was in prison for, I think, like 15 years. And he said, the scariest night of my life was my first night out of prison, because they gave me $35 and a bus pass, and I had nowhere to go, and I didn't know what to do, and I didn't know how to get a job. And, my family had abandoned me, and on and on. And I just felt so much compassion for all of a sudden. I felt, first of all, personally embarrassed that I had never even thought about this, and that there was this whole contingency of people in our world that we don't necessarily think of or know much about, who are just trying to like get their life back in order. So sort of in that moment, I thought, well, God, I'm a lawyer, and the only reason you guys can't get a job or a place to live is because we have laws that impact your ability to sort of move on with your lives. And maybe I can help you by teaching you how to change laws. So sort of in that moment, I decided I was going to figure out how to help this group of people learn how the legal, legislative, and policy system works. And so I put together what I originally called was a workshop, and I got a workshop leader that I knew who was really talented. And we started to teach, and we had 75 formerly incarcerated people came to our first workshop. And we were talking about how to, first of all, how a bill becomes a law, and then the importance of organizing, and we talked about like civil, the civil rights system, and we talked about marriage equality, and we talked about different ways that different groups have organized to change laws over the course of history. And then we started talking about how you can use your story to talk to a policymaker. And then we had some legislators come in the afternoon, and after we practiced telling our stories, they did, and then they would tell their stories to the legislators. And then all of a sudden, like the sky opened up, because these legislators were sitting there, and they started to cry, some of them, because they're like, we have never heard this. Like, we didn't understand the impact of our laws on you guys, because we don't ever have an opportunity to talk to this particular group of people, because like, they don't have a lobbyist, right? So they don't really have a way to get organized to tell their story to people in a policymaking position. So one thing led to another, and we started having more and more workshops. And then one thing I learned early on is that this particular demographic of people can't just volunteer. Like, I'd say, oh, let's go to Olympia and we can talk to the legislator. And there's like, we can't do that. We can't take a day off work, and we don't have any money, and we can't buy gas, and who's going to pay for our lunch? And so I just started paying for everything for them to be able to exercise sort of their rights as citizens to go talk to the legislators, and to put together workshops. And we had workshops all over the state, and one thing led to another. And meanwhile, I start then hiring people to run this organization, because now it's really starting to take off. And then I cleverly thought I should probably turn it into a nonprofit. No surprise there. And so we did. And now it's a freestanding nonprofit. It's become super successful, and every legislator in the state pretty much knows our organization and our leaders and our people. And one of our leaders in our organization just recently, a couple of years ago, got elected to the state legislature in the state of Washington. And another one just got, she's on the city council of Bremerton. We've got another one running for office. So they're starting to, now that they've learned kind of how the system works, they're starting to take advantage of it and step into their own leadership. So it's been really, really rewarding.
Now, is the organization the Civil Survival Project? Is that the one you're referring to?
And that's a nonprofit headquartered it's in the Seattle area. And it's a statewide organization. And now they've recently added, so now I've kind of stepped back because it's not really my role. My job was to fund it and to get it launched and to mentor. And now it should be run by people who have been impacted by the criminal legal system. And they're stepping into leadership skills. And they recently started to provide legal services. And so they hired a bunch of lawyers, and now they're doing record vacates and different types of legal services for people that have come out of prison to make their lives easier.
It's a great story. Van Jones, I don't know if you know Van Jones, who was with the Obama administration. He was very much involved in criminal justice. I mean, people in prisons, and they would do things like kind of take a survey of how many tattoos they had, whether they were adding tattoos or not. Just trying to keep up, take the pulse of their situation and how they were getting along, and then making the transition back into society, which the Shawshank Redemption really underscored that. The old man who got released from prison, and he walked out into a world that was like, it changed entirely from the time before he was sent to prison, and he was crossing streets and cars were skidding and honking at him, and it was a terrible situation. So I get it.
Like, that's not just fictional. Like, I've got a lot of friends that have spent a lot of time in prison, and it's hard for them. I just have one friend who just came out maybe a few months ago, and I've known him while he's been in prison, and I think he's been in there maybe close to 20 years, maybe. But just going to the grocery store, everything is sensory overload. Like, there's so many, what kind of toothpaste should I buy? Or like what, and then having the independence to be able to decide what to do with your time. Like, they're so used to get up at 5 o'clock, and then you're going to have your breakfast, and then this is going to happen. And then there's no agency when they're inside. And so they come out. I mean, first of all, there's obvious things like technology and iPhones. And one friend of mine was telling me that he went to a public restaurant when he came out, and he couldn't figure out how to turn the water on in the bathroom.
Right.
Stuff that we take so for granted, or going to the grocery store and seeing a scanner, or anyway, they get sensory overload. And this one friend of mine I was just talking about, who came out really recently, his friends told him, like, he was all on Facebook and all this, like, lots of sensory input, and his friends were just saying, you gotta just chill, like, go out in the woods or something for a day and just calm down, because they get very sensory overloaded really easily.
Yeah. Well, you say that, well, that's real life too. It's not just, in Shawshank Redemption, but, fiction comes from real life.
That's right.
In your novels, you must be using, you do use your experiences and real world experiences, which kind of leads to a question I wanted to ask you, which is, you could have written a nonfiction book or a series of nonfiction books about these issues. You decided to write novels. And do you feel that a novel is any less powerful in terms of just conveying information to people that in a way that they understand?
I think a novel is way more powerful because, like, for example, like in The Complication, the first book that I wrote, it's about an older man who dies. And by the way, the first scene in The Complication and the first scene in Deliver Them from Evil are taken from actual cases that I had when I was a malpractice lawyer. They're fictionalized a little bit, but they're very. So in The Complication, this older guy dies through the negligence of a doctor, and the older guy happens to have been a sort of Camille's mentor. And so she finds all this value in him as a person. And she's fighting with the insurance company who keeps saying he doesn't have any value. You know, he was old and he wasn't working very hard and, you know, he was lazy. And so I think, and my goal in that book was to get people to think about whether it's right how we value people's lives in the justice system. Like maybe if somebody who reads my book sits on a jury someday, they might say, wait a minute, like I'm not buying this stupid argument that because they're old, they don't have value. So I think that you're way more likely to internalize that if you are reading this book about this guy named Dallas Jackson, who was such a cool guy who died, and you've sort of been living along with Camille the frustration of trying to prove his value in the justice system. So I feel like that's why I did it. I feel like it's way more compelling because then you get to know the people and then you care about them. And like any other book you read, you put the book down and hopefully 6 months later or 2 weeks later or something, they pop back into your consciousness like, oh, I remember that scene. So yeah.
Yeah, no, it makes perfect sense. I mean, that's the thing about novels. You develop relationships with the characters. By contrast, nonfiction books usually are, well, I'm going to give you an example, then I'm going to give you another example and another one. And those are quick hits. You don't really develop a relationship or empathy or sympathy for that particular character who's just simply a very temporary case study in a nonfiction book. I mean, there are nonfiction books that are about a particular person and it's a long narrative that's different. That's almost like a novel. But yeah, what you're saying makes perfect sense. So the you're busy, you're a busy person, you're a lawyer. When do you talk about your your writing regimen? Are you a morning or evening writer? Are you catch as catch can? What is a good writing day to you? Tell us a little bit about that.
I love that you think I have a regimen. I think that's pretty inspiring. Um, so I have a really busy law practice. I am actively litigating cases. I'm getting ready for a trial in July 1st. Um, so I'm a weekend writer, honestly, or vacations. So I live most of the time now, I live in Baja and Todos Santos, down about an hour north of Cabo on the Pacific side. And so I'll just sit up I have like a little rooftop deck and I'll sit up there on the weekends and write. But I can't do it in chunks. I couldn't do it in the morning and then go to work because once I get my head into it, I have to stick with it. And I think, writing a mystery is, I don't know, I've never written anything else, but it's so complicated because you got to keep track of all the different threads of the story. And things happen to me all the time when I'm writing where it's a surprise, like I didn't see that coming. And like in the Unshackled, the one I just finished, and I'm doing the copy editing with the copy editor now. Like when I was starting it, there's this one character and he's just horrible. He's awful and mean, and he's kind of the villain. And then later on, he starts having some redeeming qualities. And then towards the end of the book, he turns into kind of a good guy. And when I realized that, then you got to go back and you can't just have him, you have to start putting some precursors into some good things about him back when he was so awful. So it takes so much attention to detail and following the strings. I would find it really hard to do that in an hour or two a day. So I need like long, several hours, many hours.
What does that mean for the timeline of your starting and then completing a book? Is it consistent, or does your agent get after you about I need you to get this thing done, you're past deadline? Are you working on deadline and so on?
I don't get to the deadline part until it goes off for the first developmental edit. Because I don't think, I decide to write a book and then it's going to take as long as it takes. But then once it gets handed over to those guys, that's where it gets a little bit more deadline driven because, they want to move it through the process. So if I didn't work, I could certainly write a lot faster. Although I think I'd get a sore back or something from sitting all day, every day writing. But it probably takes about a year.
About a year. So
That
you
was
do sit. You use a keyboard or using a legal pad.
keyboard. I can't write. I'm way beyond being able to handwrite stuff anymore.
Yeah,
My
no, I
writer's
get it.
cramp. Yeah. I get it.
So,
My writer's cramp. I'm the only lawyer I know that can't hardly write because like the tennis elbow thing that happens when you write a lot.
Hmm. Hmm. So the um, process for you is to outline the book in advance, or do you try to let it develop organically?
It's pretty organic. Like right now, I'm working on this fourth book and I'm starting to flesh out in my mind, like I write notes on who these characters are and I kind of do a background, sort of like get to know them a little bit before I even start writing. And then I kind of know where it's going to start and maybe some of the big scenes are going to be like where things are going to pivot. But then the rest of it, honestly, like in the complication when I was writing that, I thought I had this woman and this man, and they were going to be this love interest, and I was kind of trying to figure out how to get them together. But every time they were together, there was no spark. And then, and then I had a private investigator and this other woman who is a doctor, and then they're just um, having dinner together. I'm like, there was just a scene, and all of a sudden they just started flirting, and I never would have seen that coming. Like they weren't who I thought was going to be the sort of love interest at all. And the ones who I thought were going to be just completely fell flat. So it really is fascinating to me how I don't know where it comes from, but it's not coming. I don't feel like it's even hardly coming from inside of me. It's just almost like you're catching a vibe or a story that's out there that's starting to flow. It's
Mm.
really a fun process, like watching a movie almost in your head.
And it takes on a life of its own.
Yeah, and the characters do too, because you think you know them, but then they surprise you.
Right, right. They take some control over the story.
Yeah, and sometimes it goes, and in Unshackled, like the whole, what do you call the climactic scene? I didn't figure that out how it was going to end until I was about halfway through, and I'm like, oh my God, this is who that is. So that was the whole point of the book. That turns out to be the whole point of the book is trying to figure out who this one, where's the baby who got kidnapped.
Now, who inspires you as a writer? Do you have a novelist or two that you found to be really inspirational in your own writing?
Honestly, I don't have a lot of time to read. I'm embarrassed to say that, but when I do, it's exciting. I would say probably, and it sounds boring, but probably say John Grisham. When I first started writing, like actually have somewhere on the shelf behind me, or Scott Turow, um, sort of those legal thriller writers.
Right. Yeah, Scott Turow is kind of I think he was really the guy who broke that genre open with Presumed Innocent. I think they're doing a remake of it, in fact.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, there's a movie called Presumed Innocent, and it said based on the novel. I'm thinking, well, who else wrote Presumed Innocent? So I don't know if it's a remake or somebody, because you can't copyright a name, a title of a book. So
Right.
I don't know. I don't know. I meant to actually investigate that, but yeah, my wife and I saw it, and I was talking to her about it. That looks interesting, but I'm wondering if it's the same uh,
Well,
John or not John
aren't they
Turturro
doing,
novel.
aren't they also doing a remake of Jason Bourne?
Probably. Well, they've done okay, a remake. You're talking about the Matt
Oh,
Damon. I mean,
yeah.
he did some of them, and now they're going to do well. That was so recent. I'm surprised they're going to do a remake.
I can't believe they're even doing a remake of Boys in the Boat because that doesn't seem like it's even that old, but I guess that's how old I am, so who knows?
So, how did you get an agent? Talk about that. Did it come rather? I mean, you had written the complication, you sent out a sample, and did it catch on pretty quickly, or did you? Well, no, you said
Oh,
that you had
no. I
somebody.
had
You
an
put it on the
agent.
shelf for 20. Yeah, you had an agent,
Yeah.
couldn't sell it, and you put it on the shelf for 20 years.
Yeah. And then I have a friend who owns a publishing company, so I kind of skipped that.
That's right. That's right.
So I'm in this organization called Women's Presidents Organization, which is a group of women who are presidents of their companies, I guess. And when COVID happened, we have a place I live mainly, or I used to live mainly in Seattle, and we have a cabin up in the San Juan Islands, which is on a remote island where it's like there's no ferry service, there's no stores, there's no police, there's no firefighters. It's remote up here. And so we came up here right when the coronavirus came. I told my husband we should go up to the island for a couple weeks until this coronavirus thing blows over. and came back literally 18 months later. But anyway, while we were up here in this dark and stormy winter, which is insanely kind of really interesting and fun, I just called my friend Ingrid, who owned a publishing company, and I said, I need something to do during this, what do we call pandemic? I'm thinking about, sort of getting these books out and updating them. And she goes, well, send me one of them and I'll see what I think. And so she read it and she liked it a lot. And she goes, yeah, I'll absolutely publish this for you. So
Nice. Was there other than that, because obviously that's a major milestone, that's your real starting point, in a sense. Was there a turning point in your writing life? Was there a time when you had a breakthrough, or you knew, hey, I'm good at this, and I like this, or even a technique that suddenly presented itself that really made the difference for you?
I don't think I have a technique. And I always kind of thought I wrote good stories, but I think, when it was super frustrating when I couldn't sell them the first time. And maybe if there was a breakthrough, it was probably just like not giving up. Because like literally, I put those on a shelf for 20 years. I didn't even think about them until, many years later. And then I just pulled them out and I thought these are actually pretty good stories. So I'd say maybe the pivot or the breakthrough was just persistence.
Hmm. That is just so critical. I mean, you hear that over and over again, that uh, you really have to stick with it. It's like chiseling away stone. Although it's an additive process, not a subtractive process. But you just got to keep at it. Actually, it's an additive process, then it's kind of a subtractive process, really. I mean, you might write a little bit differently, but I'm sure that there are times when you produce a bunch of copy and then you start chiseling away at it, boiling it down to what is,
Yeah.
really essential and keeps the pace that you're looking for.
Well, yeah, that when I first wrote The Complication, like I first wrote it, well, I was first writing it, and I realized I probably, didn't really know how to write a book, obviously. And so I somehow hired a editor. I can't remember how I even found her, but anyway, I found this woman who said she'd help me. And then she hooked me up with one of her editors. And this was, honest to God, I think I mailed it to her. This has to be before even, I don't say it was before computers, but it was before maybe email, or I'm not quite sure why. But anyway, I remember it came back to me and it looked like a chicken had died on this manuscript. Everything was red. I mean, there was lines and squiggles and crossouts. And I called this woman, I can't remember her name, and I said, I think I should just give this up. And she goes, no, no, no. This is a really good story. You just don't know how to structure things. Like you don't know how to structure a scene, and you don't know, it's not, you can do it. And so she was super encouraging, but it went back and forth a lot. And pages and pages and pages and pages and chapters got yanked out of that thing. But honestly, when you write those, it helps your writing. So I don't think it's for naught. Like I wrote some really great scenes that will never see the light of day, but it taught me to be a better writer, kind of, except for that she
Mhm.
did it all up with her red pen. But and that's the other thing about this is I think maybe because maybe I'm making this up, but maybe because I'm a lawyer and my life is pretty much being attacked by I'm a litigator, right? So every single thing I do, someone's attacking me or my client, mostly my client. But what I mean? Like I live in a world of very high conflict. And so I don't take anything very personally. So when I got that manuscript back that was, all red ink all over it, it was more like first of all, it's like, oh, this is ridiculous. I shouldn't do it. But as soon as she told me I could, then it was just a challenge. So I think I think part of getting good at this craft is being really willing to take feedback seriously and not take it doesn't mean you can't do it. But if you're a person, I think that feels really, I don't know, unsure of yourself or unwilling to be self-reflective, it would be
hmm
harder.
hmm Yeah. So, I mean, you probably have pretty thick skin because the law is an adversarial process,
Exactly.
and you could almost see your a book editor or development editor as an adversary, in as much as the red ink comes back, and it doesn't feel good to have that going on, but as you say, stay open to it. You do the rewrite, and you've got something that's more refined,
The
and
rewrite and the rewrite and the rewrite and the rewrite. Oh my
So
God.
what is the hardest part of, I mean, there's a lot of people who say, why would people do that? Because even people who are successful with writing say that it's quite a torturous or at least an exacting process. So what is the reward for you in the writing?
Well, I think it's getting the stories out because I do it. I don't just write books for the sake of writing a book. Like I'm not writing a book if I'm looking at your picture here with you on the canal in France. Like I'm not writing a book about someone walking down a French canal and there's a mystery that happens there. I'm writing for me personally because I want a message out. And so when I get kind of tired and feeling frustrated, I'm like the book I'm writing right now, I just finished Unshackled about the women in prison. Every time I feel like, oh, then I feel like I'm the voice for tens of thousands of women that are sitting in prisons all across our country. And I feel like a huge responsibility to get their story out.
Yeah. So that propels you there. I mean, you're working on behalf of not just the readers, but the people who are subject to this injustice
Mhm.
or these struggles in life. So you've got really a couple different things going on there, because you probably do enjoy being a creative person, a creative writer as well, I would imagine.
Mhm.
True?
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. Mhm.
So what is the hardest part of the writing for you? Well, I won't even supply any adjectives here. You tell me.
It's probably when it's the discipline, I think. I'm super disciplined person because I have
You
to
have to
be.
be.
Um, because I have a lot going on. And I'm also somebody who has a really different sense of time. Like I've never, ever, ever feel like I don't have enough time. It's not a thing for me. But once in a while, I just feel like I go up to write and I'm like, oh, I just don't feel like doing this today. And then I just start reading. And then I don't know, it's sort of a weird, I don't know how to describe it. Now I feel like I'm getting kind of woo-woo, but I feel like the women in prison are like, not exactly coming through me, but like I get this feeling like they're depending on me. And so the hard part is when I feel like I don't want to do it, it's kind of like jumping in a pool or something. You put your foot in the water and it feels a little bit cold and stuff, but then once you get in, it's great. So it's that moment of just sitting down to do it and like, oh, I don't and especially the part when you're not writing the creative part, but you're going back and sort of fixing things. Oh, and then when the copy editors, now I'm getting going. When the copy editors show up and then it says things like, then you're doing all this detail stuff. Like the character came into the room and took her leather jacket off and threw it on the chair. And then the scene happens and she grabbed her red sweater and, went home. And then like, was it a leather jacket or was it a red sweater? It's like, ah,
Yeah. Yeah. So
when was Camille born? Or you said over here that she lived in Seattle in, 1974, but over here you said it was 72. And how old is she? And when did she go to high school? And I'm just like, oh my God, you guys are killing me. So that's the hard.
mhm. Yeah. In the other, you did mention it's kind of like jumping in the pool. It's just getting going. And I
Mhm.
had a guy on the podcast who said that a turning point for him was that he committed to writing one word a day. And he said, but once you open your laptop and you sit down, you don't really write just one word. And he said, but I literally one day where I didn't have the energy to do it. I didn't have the energy to write. I literally wrote one word, closed it up, but that was the exception. He said, but once you make the barrier so low that you're willing to open up the file and sit down, he said, then you might write a paragraph, you might write 5 pages, you might write 10 pages. You just don't know. It might just be a sentence that particular day. Uh,
Wow.
so and there was a woman on the podcast who said, when she said, I really think it's important to stay connected to your work and your story. So she said, I think it's important to write every day, even if all you do is open it up and look at what you wrote most recently, so that
Yep.
you're still connected to it. And your mind goes to work on that. I mean, this is me talking now. She didn't go this far with it, but it's almost like putting it in an incubator. It develops because it's working in the subconscious, really. I don't want to get woo either, but let's face it, the mind is multidimensional, and it's when we're thinking about the work or we're staying um, current with it, staying connected to it, as she said, it starts to develop and ideas just start to spring.
That's good. That's really,
Don't you
that's a
think?
good,
Yeah,
well, yeah, I like that. I think that's good. And for me, it's in a funny way, staying connected to it, like for this Unshackled, part of staying connected is staying connected to my friends who've had the experience of being moms in prison. So sometimes I just have to have a call with them to sort of reignite my like, okay, this is important.
yes, yes,
So sometimes it's, and then some for someone else it might be research, but I don't really do research because I write about what I'm so proximate to.
exactly. You've already done the research, and it's a continuing research as well. So you're in Cabo area. You're sitting on your rooftop, not rooftop, but your deck or patio
Yeah, rooftop
in
deck.
your
Uh-huh. Yep.
rooftop deck. You're going to write. Do you ever write under the influence of anything? A caffeine, a margarita, um, cannabis is legal in your state. Is there any kind of an accelerant you use for the writing?
I think no, my excellent probably meditating, honestly. I'm a big meditator and I meditate every single morning on this. It's unbelievably pretty. You sit up on top of this rooftop and look over the palm grove and the Pacific Ocean's out there. And in the winter, the whales are jumping around and you just get, and the birds are going crazy and you get this sort of vibe going. And that's sort of a good way to get in touch with the characters. So I don't
So
write
is
it.
that the kind of meditation? Now, this is a personal question because
Mhm.
meditation is a personal practice.
Right.
Um, but is your type of meditation where you sit and you are holding in your mind what you're working on and just allowing it kind of to float and maybe start to take shape? Is that the sort of thing, or do you use a mantra or count your breaths? What's your technique, if you don't mind my asking?
Well, it kind of depends on the day, but sometimes it's just being totally quiet and breathing and listening to the birds. And it's funny. Um, one night I was having trouble sleeping, and I thought I'm going to listen to one of these apps, to like you put it in your ears. And where I live, you can hear the waves crashing really loud. And I put the app in my ears, and it was an app of waves crashing. I'm like, well, that's so anyway, there's some meditation. The reason I say that is some meditation, like recordings that are birds chirping and stuff like that. But I live in that environment, which is with the waves crashing in the background and the birds is very, very peaceful. So sometimes it's just listening and breathing and being calm, and other times it's sort of letting, is sometimes it's very directed visualization, like what I want to have happen and how it's, what it's going to feel like, what it's going to be like. And sometimes it's how's the story going to go. And sometimes, the other thing I do, I have a lap pool and it's really blue and sparkly. And when the sun beats in it, it's really it's really pretty. It's a long lap pool. And sometimes I do a lot of thinking about characters, like I'll go swimming and I wish I could write in the pool. I don't know how to do that, but sometimes all the scenes will start. If I'm stuck, sometimes I'll just go start swimming laps, and then it'll all come to me. So I think because I don't write at night, so I wouldn't write with alcohol, and I'm too sensitive to caffeine. I don't really drink coffee because that keeps me awake too much. I'm a green tea drinker, so I would say my accelerant is probably almost like nature or activity or peacefulness or something.
hmm Um, do you actually I want to ask you about your character other than Camille Delaney, but when you introduce a character in a book, I mean, how do you go about the development process with a character? I mean, there are some writers that decide if I'm going to have this character, I'm going to flesh this character out now, just write and write and write about him or her and and get a real feel for the character and flesh out all the characteristics about them that are going to be unfurled in the book along the way. Do you take that kind of approach at all, or do you just does it just develop as you go?
I think I usually think a little bit about who they are a little bit, but sometimes more than others. But like in the second book I wrote, Deliver Them from Evil, this young legal assistant or this messenger shows up and she's turns into a legal assistant. And I didn't realize when I was introducing her and as Camille got to know her, that she had done time in prison. So that I didn't know that until, well into her, when she was a character there. So trying to think of, usually I think I know who they are, but I'm not usually right. Let's put it that way.
You were saying that sometimes they just take their own direction.
They
And
do. And sometimes
that's
you're just getting to know them and you're like, oh, that's why she's that way because her father did that. So you're like, it's like I'm getting to know them as I'm writing them. And there might be a conversation where there's this Camille's friend named Gigi, and Gigi's saying, my dad died and this happened, that and that. And I didn't really know that until I was writing it. And then I'm like, oh, that's why she's that way. Because so sometimes it's more for me, but like now I'm getting ready for this next book and I'm thinking a little bit, it might be because I'm getting better at this and I'm starting to see how it kind of how it goes. But now I'm sort of fleshing out the main character, but I'm sure she's gonna, if you ask me a year from now, I'm gonna probably tell you, well, that was a bust. Like she didn't turn out anything like I thought. So I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. So I would think that that's ideal though when a character takes on a life of her own, because it's almost as though, and you were describing this earlier, it's almost as though you're channeling. But although you were saying you're not really sure it's coming from inside of you, you sound like you're a spiritual person. You believe in the metaphysical.
Yep.
Okay, so it can actually work for you, the idea that it's coming from another place, or that you're channeling it from almost another dimension.
Kind of. I honestly, yeah, between you and me, I think that's kind of true. It's like there's a vibe out there and I catch it and then I ride the wave and then it all starts to unfold itself. And um, yeah, I don't think it's necessary. I feel like I don't know, like, do you believe in that sort of like you've got something in your DNA that comes from a different place? Or I don't, sounds a little bit crazy, but
My sister believes that, and she has said that. Well, she doesn't believe in reincarnation. She thinks that all the
right.
DNA that gets passed along is
Yeah.
actually that's the memory, is that
Yeah.
it's
Yes.
from the past. So that's what you're talking about. Yeah.
That's not even like it's my memory. It's like I feel like, like something's talking to me from someplace else, but it's not even necessarily somebody used to live before. It could be these women inside prison. Like I'm sort of connecting with, what
The
they want
mass
to communicate.
subconscious, right? Or the
I know.
mass subconscious or
Now we're going
unconscious.
way off the deep end, but
Yeah.
I
Well,
think that's right. I think that's
I mean,
how to do it. Yeah.
I'm just a big believer in the whole idea that, I mean, we know things today that we couldn't have fathomed 100 or 500 years ago. And the idea that we've discovered it all is complete folly. There's obviously a lot more that we still have yet to discover. And we've probably only scratched the surface just in terms of, our own environment, just the physical
Right.
environment, let alone anything that's dimensional. So let me ask you about, authors are celebrities, but so are lawyers. There's a lot of lawyers who are well known, they're celebrities. Is there a lawyer out there who, if you were having a dinner party and you're going to invite a few people or just maybe one special guest, is there a lawyer who you would invite because you have tremendous respect for him or her?
Brian Stevenson.
I say it again.
Brian Stevenson.
Now, why don't I know Brian? Oh, wait a minute. Yes, I do know him.
That's
He did
Mercy.
the fabulous TED Talk. He's a black man with a bald head, right?
Mhm. Yep.
And he's a social justice warrior like you are, correct?
Well, I would be very honored to be put in his category, but that's very kind of you. He wrote a book called Just Mercy, and if you have not read it, I would definitely put it on your list.
Just Mercy.
Just Mercy. He is a civil rights lawyer. He went to some fancy East Coast, Harvard or Yale or one of those fancy places, and he ended up getting a job in Mississippi or Alabama or some place in the South. And he is a lawyer who helps people get off of death row. And he is an extraordinary person. And in fact, here's another book for you. I do a lot of like community, like I'm on a lot of boards and stuff. And one time I was chairing the Innocence Project dinner in Seattle, which is the organization that helps innocent people get out of prison. And we wanted Brian Stevenson to speak at our dinner. And he said he was not available, but he said, I'm going to send a really good friend of mine whose name is Anthony Ray Hinton, and you'll love him. And we're like, well, who's that? And this is going to be weird. And this guy comes, and Anthony Ray Hinton, wrote a book called something about the sun. I can't remember what it's called. Anyway, write his name down. He is a person who spent, I don't know, like 30 or 40 years on death row for a crime
Wow.
he didn't commit. And he is one of the most interesting, fabulous. I get chills just thinking about him. So anyway, Brian Stevenson is freaking amazing. He is building a museum, or he built a museum in Montgomery, Alabama, that has it's a tribute to all the lynching victims. What's it called? Anyway, he's a cool guy. You should look him up. He did do a TED Talk, but he also writes books, and he also has a museum and a giant nonprofit. But he is like hero status for me. Like he lives the talk.
And for our listeners, it's Brian with a Y, Bryan Stevenson. If you don't want to commit to Just Mercy, the book that Amanda just mentioned, and you just want to be introduced to Brian Stevenson, he does these terrific, he's got at least a couple terrific TED Talks on TED.com. Interesting. Yeah, at first I didn't think I knew him, but then all of a sudden it dawned on me. Yeah, I
And
just
I
haven't heard from him in a long time, just in terms of his name come up.
I think Just Mercy is also a movie, I'm pretty sure. So if you don't want to spend time
Ah,
reading a book, but you can't put his book down. And if you don't, it sounds like you're Googling, but and see what Anthony Ray Hinton wrote. Is The Light of Other Suns or something like
let's
that.
see here. So it's Anthony Ray
Ray
Hinton.
Hinton. The,
Okay, let's see. He's coming up now. That would be um, well, he's with the Equal Justice Initiative, but what did he write? Um, Let me just put in book.
Google it on Amazon. This is pretty funny. What are we doing here?
I'm doing it right on Google, which I probably should have done on Amazon. So he's got one, The Sun, the
Yep,
Sun Does Shine.
that's it.
And
That's such a good book. Unbelievably good book.
and that is I think there's also that's an Oprah Book Club selection as well. I see there's 9,000, almost 10,000 reviews. He's got 5 stars. Pretty impressive. Uh,
Yeah.
just in closing, Amanda, so there's a lot of people out there who want to achieve what you've achieved, and you've done it. A lot of people think, boy, you need to be a full-time writer. That's the only way I can do it. I can't do a full-time job and write. And yet you see so many people who do that, who actually do not only have a full-time job, but high responsibility jobs, and they still manage to write. Um, what would your advice be to the aspiring novelist? Now, I know you said persistence, and that might be number one, but is there anything else that you would add to that?
Well, it's kind of like what we were just talking about. Like you have to have a vision of yourself. And this is true for anything, like how to run a law firm, how to start a nonprofit, I also have a scholarship. So it would be, you have to have a vision. You have to be able to see yourself doing it, and you have to believe in yourself. So you have to, and I don't know, I have done a lot of work in, I don't know, sort of learning how to do visioning and stuff like that. And one thing I always tell myself is we all have an idea of what it looks like to get to where you're going to be. So somebody might have had an idea of what it looks like to get to owning a law firm, for example. But when I was in the middle of the bad boys telling me, which is what I called my old law partners, that I was a dilettante doctor's wife dabbling at the law, I don't know that I would have thought this is what it looks like on my way to owning a really successful and well-known law firm. So when something happens to you that looks like it's not what you expected, you have to incorporate that into your journey. So it's like you get your book rejected and it goes, well, this isn't what I thought it was going to look like. Because there's a bigger, like if you have a really strong vision, usually it's going to somehow happen, but you can't hold really tight to how it's going to happen. So sometimes it's just like, I didn't think this is what it was going to look like. I'm sure if you asked an Olympic swimmer, like they would lose a bunch of swim meets, but they really believe in themselves. And you're in the middle of a time when it doesn't look right, like maybe they broke their leg or something. It's like you'd have to say, well, this isn't how I was going to expect to win my Olympic medal, but this is now incorporated into my journey. So when something happens that you judge doesn't look like it's going to get you to where you want to go, you have to let go of that and hold the vision and say, this is, I'm going to look back on this, and this is going to be an important part of how I got to here.
Excellent advice. Amanda DuBois, thank you for coming on the program.
Thanks, Mike. This was really fun. Thanks for having me. And I've given me some stuff to think about. So that's really cool.